Would you like to meet Shaq or get a Cam Johnson signed jersey? How about an NBA 2K video game? These are some of the previous prizes I've given away, and you can get exclusive access to these competitions by becoming a member of my basketball community. Have you ever thought about asking your favorite basketball player a question? Now you can. Become a producer of my YouTube show and help me create amazing interviews with basketball stars. Join my community now. There's a link in the video description below.
Let's go, Rush!
Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, Rush. Today we're going to be breaking down the Boomers World Cup, and I've got a special guest in the building, Michael Hooven. Welcome to the show, my man.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Alright man, so before we get into things, what is your background in the basketball scene?
Yeah, I'm involved in a few different facets of the Aussie basketball scene. I mean, some people might know me from my writing with the pick and roll. I've been writing since about 2019 or so. Covering all facets of the Australian game, and then also do a bit of scouting. So done some work for NBL teams and start up a business this year, Airtime Scouting, helping these young emerging kids come through, break into the Aussie and US college system.
All right, so let's talk World Cup. On paper, Australia essentially had the best team that we've ever put together. Unfortunately, the results didn't go the way we were expecting. Where do you think things went wrong?
Yeah, it was brutal, right? I think the biggest learning that we took away from it is you'd have the best team on paper, doesn't necessarily translate to the results. You know, the big thing was what we have 9 NBA players. That's fantastic, but if you think about what made the Boomers great this last 10, 15 years, it was the continuity. It was that synergy that we had. It wasn't because we had a heap of NBA players, but they played together. They played with a grit to them. And I think that's something we didn't necessarily see this time around. And it's not to say the guys didn't play hard, but this was a time of change. It was a handing over of the guard. We had emerging talents come through like your Josh Giddeys, like your Josh Greens. So cool to see, but it means that we had to change up the dynamics. And I think the results that we saw was a result of them not really figuring out how to change in time and figure this thing out.
I agree. So what adjustments would you make to the squad leading up to Paris?
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, there's some obvious inclusions. Jock Landale went down. That was brutal. Ben Simmons is out there. He might participate at some point. But beyond a personnel standpoint, I think this group just needs time. We saw guys like Josh Giddey come through, play a major role. That's great. But how do we maximize this group together? I think they're still learning how to play off of each other, learning what everyone's roles are. I do think that'll come with time. It'll come with these guys playing with each other and figuring that out. But there were some standout issues to me. I think the first thing that we saw is defense. This is something that was like the stalwart of the Boomers over the last decade or so. These guys played hard on the defensive end. We got guys like Matisse Thybulle, guys like Josh Green. On paper, again, we got the personnel to get it done, but it didn't happen. And when you don't get stops, you don't get transition points. We're young and athletic. We need to run. Instead, we had this lethargic half-court offense. It was really stagnant, and I think that meant that we needed to lean on guys like Giddey and Mills to do like really tough operating, scoring the ball, and role players like Thybulle, like Joe Ingles really struggled to find a role as a result of that as well.
If we look at the Slovenia game, I mean, one thing that we really lacked was rebounding. We couldn't get a rebound to save our lives. Yeah. And obviously, as you mentioned, we missed Jock Landale out there. Should we have brought in someone like Thon Maker or another big man in replacement of him? Yeah,
it's like one of the biggest what ifs, right? I know a lot of people have been talking about it, and we cut a lot of bigs really early. That being said, personally, I don't reckon a guy like Thon Maker was necessarily the answer. He's big, he's skilled, but does he bring that physicality and that griminess on the boards that we needed? Not necessarily, in my opinion. So would have been nice to have a bit more size, and would have been really interesting to see how that would have played out. But I think going small based on who we had available was pretty legit. It was a very reasonable decision to make, and like sometimes it paid dividends. We saw guys like Xavier Cooks crash the glass. We saw in Japan he had like 16 rebounds. So at times it was great, but yeah, the lack of size hurt a lot.
And I was really surprised that Duop Reith wasn't getting more minutes. I mean, what was your thoughts on that? Do you feel like we needed him in there a bit more?
Yeah, it's interesting because he was like the one true big, right? And at times he was fantastic. The things he did well, he did awesome. He stretched on the floor, hitting threes, blocking shots, finishing above the rim on guys. And that stuff was really needed, and it was great. I think the trade-off and the reason we went smaller some of the time is a little bit slower. And I think of that Germany game, particularly Dennis Schroeder, the guy just cooked us all game. It's because they're switching onto guys like Duop, like Nick Kay, who are a little slower, and just burning him off the dribble. So, I think it goes both ways. Probably could have played more. Maybe it would have helped us, but I get the logic behind it.
Now, I've been doing a lot of reading online in the comments on the Australian Boomers Instagram page and different forums. And one thing that a lot of people seem to be frustrated with is the coach and the rotation that he did throughout the World Cup. A lot of people complaining about Joe Ingles and Nick Kay getting too much court time. I mean, how did you see the situation?
It's tough, right? Like, I do not envy Brian Goorjian coaching in a tournament like this. And I think there's two ways you look at it. On one hand, you have to make decisions quickly. Like, these games are do or die, and you need to make decisions on the fly based on how things are going. But on the flip side, you also got to trust your guys. Like, let's take Patty Mills as an example. You saw those warm-up games, the guy was bricking everything. If you just took that sample, you'd be like, let's bench this guy. But we know what Patty does. He's been doing it his whole career. The team had trust in him. We get into the real games, he lights it up. He was a big factor for us. So I think the same applies to guys like Joe Ingles, guys like Nick Kay. Joe Ingles is a vet. He's one of the cornerstones of this team. We know what he does at the NBA level. And frankly, we needed shooting. It was one of the biggest issues. And, maybe the shot didn't fall from this tournament, but we had to live or die by that. And similarly with Nick Kay, we didn't have the strongest front court. Nick Kay is a guy that's gotten it done for us in the past. He was fantastic at Tokyo. Unfortunately, again, not his best tournament, but, you have to give him his roses and be like, this is a guy that has stepped up in the past, and we've got to give him a chance out there.
Now, there's a few other guys that didn't get too many minutes. Dyson Daniels, Jack White, Chris Goulding. Do you feel like they should have seen a bit more court time?
Yeah, it's hard, right? Like, you can't play every guy, and I think there's an argument for all of them, and in particular CG. This guy was put on the squad for shooting. We lacked shooting. I think, it would have been nice to see him thrown out there at least once when we were struggling. See if he gives us a spark, because we know he can be a microwave shooter. Then you look at a guy like Jack White, didn't play a whole heap. I think that's a tough one. I thought he was really good in his minutes. The challenge is, though, he was sort of fighting for those minutes with Xavier Cooks, and I thought Xavier was amazing. You look at the Japan game again, he was dominant. I think you had to give him the priority for those minutes between the two of them. And then Dyson, what an unusual one, right? Guy comes in with so much pedigree. We know what potential he has, but it was tough. I think guys like Josh Green, guys like Matisse Thybulle bring a similar quality on the defensive end, made him somewhat redundant right now. And then you look at the warm-up games, I think he looked a bit timid. He has that inexperience, that youth. And, it was fair enough that he didn't play. Maybe he could have provided an opportunity to contribute if he did. But I'm not too worried. You fast forward 12 months, this guy, I have no doubts he's going to contribute and be a big part of the Olympics next year.
Now, it hasn't been all bad news for the Boomers in the World Cup. What positives did you see from the group of guys?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was brutal, and we're still reeling off that. But I think if you look long term, it's not bleak outlook. The future is really bright, and that starts with Josh Giddey. This is a guy that 2 years ago was cut from the team. Now he was essentially our best player. That was awesome to see, and we knew he was capable of that. But credit to the coaching staff and the Boomers for leaning into that. You got guys like Josh Green, Dyson Daniels emerging. There's more guys coming through the ranks. I think that's super exciting. And as we touched on, the further we get along with this, there's going to be more cohesion. They're going to figure things out. And that talent's going to translate not just from on paper, but to results over time.
Speaking of Josh Giddey, I mean, he's only 20 years old. He's a rock star already.
Yeah.
Do you feel like we should be building the team around him leading up to Paris?
Yeah, 100%. And I think to some extent we already did. Again, it was so encouraging to see Josh just giving the ball in his hands. And, we're used to seeing Paddy sort of dominate the offense. And Paddy still had his part to play. But, we really lent into Josh and, he did it. He was the guy. Going forward, we need to continue to do that. I think figure out how do we utilize Josh's playmaking individually but still get some more ball movement going at the same time. And then, of course, the other aspect is maximizing the spacing, putting the right guys around him where he can make plays and guys can finish, where we have the right shooters to give him the space to operate.
And what do you think makes Josh Giddey such a special player? Because the fact that he's 20 years old, he's a Melbourne boy. What do you enjoy about his game the most?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think that he's 20 years old, right? Like, he was playing like a vet out there. And I think that's a testament to the two qualities that make him great, which is his size and his smarts. This is a guy, not a superstar athlete, in a run jump sense. It's not going on dunking on guys, but he's a guy that sees over the defense. He makes the right play every time. Play makes with the best in the world. And, we saw a certain level of poise to him. So you add those qualities together. He's a sensational talent. Something I was really stoked to see in this event. He was playing bully ball out there. He was using his strength. He was getting these other guards, like getting his shoulder into him and floating up these shots. If he does that consistently and uses his size to just manhandle guys and get into the paint, then he's going to be like unstoppable offensively.
Now, one player that we would love to see in the Australian jersey in Paris, Ben Simmons.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Ben Simmons? Do you think he will actually play for the Boomers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know a lot of people are cynical. It's been so long. It feels like every time Ben has committed or at least shown a willingness to play, something's come up, right? And maybe I'm a sucker, but every time I hear Ben say he wants to put on the green and gold, I'm all in. So I'm going to will it into existence. You even look at this year. There's a pretty legitimate reason Ben didn't play. That back was stuffed. We saw it in Brooklyn this year. If he can get right and play for the Boomers, I would love to see it happen.
What do you think Ben Simmons would bring to the squad? And I mean, do you think he would fit into the group of guys? And how do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the Ben that we get, right? If it's the injury crippled Ben that we saw this past season in Brooklyn, then he's a role player on this team. That doesn't mean he doesn't have his value. Like, he's this immense physical presence, a fantastic playmaker. I could almost envision him passing the ball from the high post like Andrew Bogut used to do for this team. But, it's a game changer. If we get even a glimpse of the Ben Simmons of old that we love, the all-star, that's a game changer. That's a guy that is a monster on defense. He's going to transform our transition offense, and he just elevates the ceiling of this team. So, if we get him, it's not going to help the spacing, but, it's so much talent that you just put them together and you figure it out later.
Okay, so big question. Going into the Paris Olympics, who would you have as your starting five for the Boomers?
Funnily enough, I don't think my team would change that much. I think, obviously Josh Giddey at the 1. That's a no-brainer, right? Paddy at the 2. I'm going with Josh Green at the 3. I think we didn't see the best of him in this tournament, but he's been amazing for the Mavs. He'll be great for us. And then the tricky thing's the front court, right? So I think Jock Landale comes back, probably starts at the 5. That'll be a massive boost for us. And then I find it really tricky who's going to start at the 4. I mean, maybe it's Ben Simmons, maybe it's Xavier Cooks, or maybe it's a guy that spreads the floor a bit more. I don't know. That's going to be the biggest question for them next year.
And what about off the bench? Are there any guys that you feel should, unfortunately get sacked from the team and bring in a new face?
It's tough. I've seen a few people say that Joe Ingles' time's done. I don't think that's the case. I think he's still a really pivotal member of this squad. I think he's still a contributor. Matisse Thybulle, I thought, had a pretty quiet tournament, but he has the potential to be a game changer defensively. So as we work out how to utilize these guys, I think they're going to play a big role. And then, I think Dyson's this big X factor, right? We didn't see what he was capable of this year, but give him another 12 months, another season in the NBA. If Josh Giddey went from a guy that was cut to the best player on the team in 2 years, what's Dyson going to be in 12 months' time? We don't know. Maybe he's a massive game changer as well.
Well, speaking of Joe Ingles, there's been a lot of criticism on him online as well. I mean, he's an incredible shooter, also an amazing trash talker.
Yeah.
What do you think happened for him in this tournament?
The biggest thing for me, and I was quite surprised to see this, he seemed a little bit tentative shooting the 3 ball. And as I said, that's something we needed. We needed a guy that was just going to catch and shoot, no hesitation, knock down. And instead, we saw him put the ball on the floor a little bit more, maybe not lean into his strengths as much. I think that's something, that he can change. That's, not a limitation in his game per se at this stage of his career. Now, obviously, he's getting older, he's slowing down a bit, but this is slow-mo Joe. Like, he's always been slow. So, I think he's game stands the test of time. You know, I think he has the potential to be a really crucial member. And then obviously you got the veteran presence as well, which is massive.
Now, we all love to point the finger when, things aren't going our way, particularly now. Like, we have high expectations of the Boomers. In the previous years, we were hoping that they might get a bronze or, at least come in the top 4, but to finish 8th this year was obviously heartbreaking. In terms of coaching, do you think there need to be any changes there?
I don't think there does. Again, I think we can be prone to knee-jerk reactions. And, right now everyone's on a downer. This is not what we expected. But if you reframe it and if you contextualize it and you talk about all the change that we've had and how this was a transition year, this is the first time these guys have played together. I think that's a massive concession you got to give this coaching staff. And then you look on top of that and you think about how this group has really, bonded over time. They've shown a willingness to develop. I think you also need to frame it and look at it like so much of it went right for us to get that rose gold. That's why it was the achievement that it was, and it took 10 years of evolution for us to get there. That doesn't necessarily mean that should be the benchmark or the expectation every time around. Now, that's what we hoped, and that's what, I think we definitely had the potential to do. But this is going to take a bit of time. And, the World Cup, it's almost harder to finish higher than an Olympics like we did. There's so many teams, so many things could have gone differently. And, in spite of all the challenges that we faced, I thought it was still a pretty decent effort from the group. Now,
going off the World Cup, looking at Paris, who do you think are essentially the top 3 teams?
Yeah, it changes a lot. There are a lot of great players that didn't play this year around. France, for instance, had a really poor showing this year. But you throw in a guy like Victor Wembanyama and all the other NBA talents that they didn't have this year, they could be really formidable. Similarly, you got Greece with Giannis, Serbia with Jokic, and their other NBA talent as well. Those guys are going to be really tough to beat.
I know that World Cup hasn't obviously gone the way we expected. Do you still think Australia has a chance at the Paris Olympics? Can we come in the top 3? Are we still a medal chance?
Yeah, I do. I think, we had a legit medal chance this year and we have a legit medal chance next year. Now, things didn't go the way we wanted this year, but the potential is still there. Now, we've identified some of the key issues going forward that they're going to have to fix. And I don't think it's easy. I don't know where the shooting's going to come from. We don't have shooters emerging, in this country right now. And the size is an issue as well. Even with Jock Landale back, we do miss guys like Aaron Baines, guys like Andrew Bogut that we've had in the past. So depends on who's available, depends how they figure it out. But I think we're going to be better next year. Hopefully it's a setback for a major comeback. And, we see this team achieve to their full potential next year.
All right, well, Michael, thanks so much for coming past today, man. If people want to follow you on a social media platform, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, they can follow my work at Twitter, @MichaelHoob. That's where I do most of my work.
Awesome. All right, man. We'll catch up soon.
Awesome. Thanks, man.